running in the sand, living on the land. The salty breeze was in our eyes. We stood beneath the dragonflies and danced.
So this is the Future of Transportation panel, and I'll just talk for about 15 or 20 minutes and try and give you a whirlwind overview of some of the things that Tesla is doing, and also try and give you a bit of a broad overview of where we think the whole industry is going. You know, there's a lot of interesting things happening. There's so many changes in the transportation world right now that it's a very fascinating topic.
My name is Stefan Heck. I'm a consulting professor at the Precourt Institute at Stanford. This is our last panel. We're going to have a bit of fun talking about the future of transportation and various kinds of vehicles. First, you've already met J.B. Straubel, CTO and co-founder of Tesla. The rest of the panel, we have Ned Couric, who is the CTO of Toyota Motor Sales USA, and he will talk a lot about the things that Toyota is doing in this space, which includes obviously the Prius that most of you know and many other things to come. And then we have Pete Trellenberg, thank you, from Exxon. He is the manager for environmental policy and planning, and comes at this from the point of view of a fuels provider thinking about how does the future landscape evolve and how do we get enough energy for transportation. And lastly, Sunil Paul, CEO and founder of Sidecar, which is one of the sharing services. Most of you probably heard of Uber. Sunil has a very unique take and actually started much earlier than Uber in this space and had the original patent, I think, from 2002 for ordering up a car on your phone, which at the time was quite visionary. But why is this such an exciting time in transportation? And I'm going to give you 3 quick slides. One, to convince you there's still an enormous productivity opportunity. We've been working on automobiles and transportation for well over 100 years now, but we still have enormous productivity potential left. Secondly, we've got not only the technology of the drivetrain and the engine and the storage, but we also have business model innovation, and sharing is one example of that, of how do we change the usage pattern, how do we change the asset utilization of cars, and I'll show you what a difference that makes to the economics. And lastly, just to tee up, why is this convergence really powerful? Because each one of these trends is actually colliding. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. We've had some debates already about what's the technology that will win, but more interesting is that we've got many more degrees of freedom than we've had for a long time. So jump right in. First of all, how many of you came here by plane versus by car? Plane? Most of you? Yep. How many by car? Good. So if you came by car, your car is probably parked. And if you came by plane, the car that you own is probably parked as well. This is the data on the US. Your car is actually parked 96% of the time, and of the 4% that you're in it, about half of it is looking for parking or stuck in congestion. And if you think about the fact that we have 1 billion cars on the planet today, going to almost 2 billion, and that each of those cars is somewhere around $20,000, $30,000, that's about $30 trillion in assets that we're getting 2% utilization on. So this is why sharing is interesting if we can get more productivity out of the same car fleet. We also, in terms of the fuel, this is an analysis that Amory Lovins first did in the 70s, but it still holds true today for internal combustion engine. We're getting incrementally better on combustion engines with turbocharging, with lightweighting the vehicles. But fundamentally, most of the fuel that you pump at the gas station still turns into heat, not actually into locomotion going forward. So still, we have a relatively inefficient engine at the core of our transportation system. We also, even though we've made a lot of progress in safety of vehicles with seat belts, automatic anti-lock brake systems, and now a lot of the sensors that avoid forward collisions, we still have 32,000 deaths in the US just from driving. It's the leading cause of death for 25 to 40-year-olds, and it's 1.2 million people worldwide every year. So this is still a very high ratio. Even if you compare to something like maritime travel or airplane travel, we're all a lot more afraid of airplane crashes than we are of car crashes. But actually, we only have about 200 deaths per year from airplane travel. So airplane travel is actually much, much safer. And we also spend a huge proportion of our money on infrastructure, which has even lower utilization. A typical road is loaded once a day in one direction, because it's usually commuting into or out of the city. And when it's loaded, it's about 10% covered with cars. Any more than that, you get a traffic jam and throughput actually drops. So at peak utilization, maximum throughput when the lane is still moving, you get about 10% coverage. 10% coverage for a couple hours a day is a fraction of a percent of utilization of 2.5% of GDP that we spend on roads. So you can see all around this system, if you look at it with a resource lens, there are enormous opportunities to increase the productivity, and we're going to talk about some of the levers of how to do that. I want to show you this just to tee up why is sharing so significant. This is a quick analysis. If you look at buying a car versus just using a car per ride. If you buy a car, you have a big investment up front, and you can see whether you buy a used or a new car. Those are the two parallel lines. They start high. Your initial acquisition, about $12,000 per year in terms of total all-in cost for the car, including depreciation, your fuel, and your maintenance. And then the incremental cost is just the fuel and the extra maintenance for driving, so the curve is relatively shallow. If you sidecar or you Uber, you have no upfront cost, right? Your initial cost is basically free. It's downloading an app on your phone, the phone you typically already possess. Then you order a ride, and you basically pay per trip, a little bit per time and a little bit per mile. It's a combination of the fare usually. And you can see the curves up there for Lyft as an example. And what's interesting is if you drive less than 5,000 miles per year in total, which is about a third of the US population drives that little per year, it would already make economic sense for you to sell your car and just to use ride sharing all the time. Now, there are many other benefits of a car, I recognize that, in terms of how good you feel in it, you like owning it, you like the status it conveys, you like the ability to choose your own car rather than get into a ride share car. But from a pure wallet point of view, you're much better off actually ride sharing if you drive that little. And if we get to sharing, like the pooling systems, like Uber Pool or Lyft Line, or what Sidecar is trying to do, where anybody can give anybody a ride, and also we get to a future world where the drivers aren't in it. Today, the driver is about 60% of the cost of a shared ride. If you eliminate the driver and you drive the vehicle autonomously, you basically shift that curve out to 10 or 12,000 miles per year. So now we're talking about most everybody would be economically advantaged by actually sharing your car.
J Slick.
One of Uber's biggest investors might soon be one of its biggest competitors. A report from Bloomberg says Google is working on its own ride-sharing app, possibly using driverless cars and intended to rival Uber's app. The outlet writes the companies are more likely to be ferocious competitors than allied. Uber also made headlines Monday for its partnership with Carnegie Mellon University's Robotics Institute, a move expected to develop autonomous cars that could put Uber in a spot to compete with Google. Uber's CEO Travis Kalanick has said before he's fascinated with the idea of driverless taxi services and one day hopes to roll out an entire fleet of them. Google's already been in the autonomous car game for a while though, releasing this video about 3 years ago and then dropping this one last year. Different looks, but the same concept.
Well, this is the question, is it looking far enough? What already Google is hypothesizing, and they've been at big conferences talking about this, do we need an Uber, do we need a taxi service at all? If we suddenly got autonomous vehicles, you and I will just have a pooling experience. We won't even need a car of our own anymore. We'll suddenly just be able to hail a nearing a car that happens to be just cruising around without a driver, and suddenly we're all in a sharing economy. Now, has Uber got far enough in that vision to be along with that game plan? Interestingly, Uber itself is getting in on the Autonomous Act. They unveiled yesterday that they've got an agreement with Carnegie Mellon, an Uber Advanced Technologies Center. And they're going to be working on, mapping. So suddenly they're getting on Google's app. They're going to be understanding their own app data, their own traffic data, their own mapping data, but also on autonomous vehicles. Maybe Uber hasn't been thinking enough outside the box. They've been so busy fighting fires on their own doorstep, particularly in Europe, they're moving ahead of regulation already. Have they really seen where the future is? And the fact that we're not going to have car services, we're going to have, as we say, hailing apps but for everyone's in each other's game. Everyone is in each other's backyard because the work has to be done. It's a race. Remember, it's not just Google doing autonomous cars. You've got Tesla thinking about it. You've even got Audi. You've even got Mercedes. Yep. Everyone's trying to push this development. Everyone's working with each other and working against each other. It's just so interesting that Google basically has skin in the game whichever way it goes. They're developing autonomous cars their way, but they've also got money bet on Uber if perhaps their one doesn't work out. Yeah.
What are we standing around for? Let's get to work. I'm driving.
No way, I'm driving.
You're both wrong. I don't have all day.
Imagine a future where vehicles talk to one another and to critical infrastructure. This connected vehicle technology can change our transportation system as we know it by enabling safe, interoperable networked wireless communications among vehicles, infrastructure, and personal communications devices. Dynamic ride-sharing applications make the logistics of ride-sharing, scheduling, reliability, and communication easier by connecting vehicles and handheld devices. Applications do the matching for us, authenticating users and connecting riders with drivers.